All right, welcome to Book by Book. Today we are going to be in 2 Kings 6:24 through chapter 9. And so we're continuing the following Elisha's exploits and in the northern kingdom. And so we are last time we ended with Elisha being surrounded by the Arameans, and the armies of the Lord were all around the Arameans. And so the Lord blinded them, and Elisha led them right into Samaria, the capital, and they gave them the feast, and the Arameans went away. And there was peace for a time. And so we pick up again in 24 with that peace breaking. And so let's jump right in, 6:24. And we'll read through 7:2. So just so you know what we're doing here. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. There was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. And so just so you know, the Jewish people were not supposed to eat donkeys. And so we're being told here that the food that they weren't supposed to eat was all that was left. And it was very, very expensive. But then also these seed pods, there's some debates on what that means. But some folks are saying that it could possibly be basically what birds don't fully digest after eating seeds, those pods. They're selling that as a way to find sustenance. So the famine is very severe, is the picture that we're being given. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried to him, "Help me, my lord the king." The king replied, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor? From the winepress?" Then he asked her, "What's the matter?" She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son.' So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, 'Give up your son so we may eat him.' But she had hidden him." When the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked, and they saw that under his robes he had sackcloth on his body. He said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today." So the famine is affecting everybody. It's not just the poor, but it's the king is also at this place of destitution. And so he is walking and seeing what's going on, and someone cries out. And here, when she says, "I need your help," he's like, "What can I do? I can't go to the winepress. I can't go to the threshing floor. There are no resources available. What am I supposed to do?" And so then we get this tragic story. And it should not be a surprise, but cannibalism is also not allowed in the law of the people of Israel. And so this is the severity of the famine, is they are resorting to eating people. And so these two women made this pact, which is a heartbreaking decision. And so they eat one child, and then the other lady hides her child. And so this kind of is putting us in a similar frame of mind, where we should think about Solomon and the two prostitutes who they both had children, and one of the children died. And Solomon, his decision was cut the baby in half. This is the same kind of dilemma that the king here finds himself in. And the king is most likely Joram, who's been the same king throughout Elisha's period here in the last several chapters. And so where Solomon displayed wisdom, Joram he grieves, he tears his royal clothes to reveal he's wearing the clothes of grief underneath that, the sackcloth and ashes. And so he's personally grieving, but then he blames Elisha for the famine. And we don't have any real indication here over the last several weeks where Elisha is saying like this famine is a judgment from the Lord. We will see here in a moment that he warned somebody of a coming famine. But yeah, there's no reason to think this is Elisha's fault. But Elisha has been the troubler of the kings in the northern kingdom for years now, and so any kind of bad event, they're going to blame the prophet who brings them bad news. And so this is where we find Joram talking about Elisha. So he's saying, well, I'm going to have him killed. Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. And so these are probably the elders of the northern tribes sitting with him in his house, maybe seeking wisdom, praying with him. We don't know for sure why they're here, but the king sent a messenger ahead. But before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Don't you see how this murderer is sending?" Sorry, I see somebody jumping in. Don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him? While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him. The king said, "This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" Elisha replied, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen?" "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it." So Elisha has this little conference with the elders, and there's a messenger coming, and they bar the door. And while the messenger is still standing out there, he's probably saying, "Let me in by order of the king," or whatever. The king finally arrives in his chariot, and Joram is not happy here. Like, I'm not going to wait for God any longer. I'm going to go ahead and have you executed, is what the tone here is. And so Elisha is saying the siege is going to break, and all of the inflated prices are going to come way down. And so a shekel at this time was probably about a month's wages. And so for flour and barley, like that is still expensive, but it's dropped significantly overnight. Now, if that were to happen, in our economy where inflated prices dropped that quickly, it would actually be kind of a problem, because we'd have way too much stuff, and it'd be crazy. And we see it will be kind of crazy as the Lord brings all of this about. But so compare a seah of flour and 2 seahs of barley, both costing a shekel, to where we started, that a hogshead sold for 80 shekels and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. Like that's crazy shift. And so the siege that the Arameans are putting in place is working, because the siege is really about trying to just deplete resources in a city so that the people will eventually surrender. And so they're at that point of absolute surrender and desperation. And so the warning here, like the servant who's like helping the king, who's like his right-hand man, essentially, is how we should read whose arm the king was leaning, is basically saying that the guy's his right-hand man, a trusted official. He's like, "God, how could this even happen?" And he's saying, "You're going to see this happen, but you won't eat any of it." And it doesn't really say what is going to happen here, but it's amazing how Elisha has a picture of the future that God is providing to him. And sometimes Elisha has a really clear picture. Other times Elisha doesn't. And we saw last week where the woman came after her son died, and he said, "I can't see what's happening right now." So he doesn't have like 100% accuracy rating, or not accuracy, 100% like visibility. But he knows now the siege is going to break. The prices are going to come way down. but not everybody's going to be able to enjoy it. So, and really it comes down to the fact that this guy who doubted, like his doubt is really like the judgment on him that he's not going to be able to enjoy the liberation. So it picks up here then in verse 3. Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. And so if you had leprosy, you had to go outside from the city, outside of the camp, to reduce any kind of contamination and keeping people, so you would keep people healthy. So it's a quarantine just outside of the city. And so leprosy was a wide range of different skin conditions in this time, but they still were outside until it was cleared up or they were healed. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die, just outside of the city?" So the siege is far enough away that people can be outside the walls, but like we're all going to die here eventually if we just stay here. So we'll go into the city. The famine is there and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, we die. So these are some real optimists here. Every option is death for them, is basically where they're at. And so, but the one chance that they know, like maybe the Arameans don't have as strict laws around leprosy. Maybe they'll welcome us in, so we don't know for sure. At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and the Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and the horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. And so the same mysterious army, they could hear it, but this time they couldn't see it, but they heard hooves and horses and the machinery of war coming towards the camp. And so the Arameans freaked out because the Egyptians, they were a powerhouse at this time, and the Hittites, this alliance coming against the Arameans was bad news. And so they left everything and didn't even bring all of their equipment. They just took off and left food and horses and all that stuff. So the men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, "What we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace." And so they are living like kings right here. Everything is at their disposal, and they're taking it and enjoying it. And then eventually they're like, "We are kind of the worst. So let's tell the people in the capital here in Samaria that the camp is empty." So they went and called out to the city gatekeeper and told them, "We went into the Aramean camp and no one was there, not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys and tents left just as they were." The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, "I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city." So this is not an unknown technique or tactic in siege warfare, and even in the Israelites and the conquest of Canaan. Joshua had a battle where they were fighting and then retreated, but only part of the army was fighting the city, but all the people, as the Israelite army was retreating, all of the soldiers chased them, leaving the city unprotected. And so the rest of the Israelite army went in and took the city. And so Joram here is thinking, this is what's the same situation. We got to be careful here. One of his officers answered, "Have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. So 5 of the horses that are left should help us. We should remember, I mean, they're eating everything. And so they've been eating horses too. Like this is where the stocks of the city are at. They have 5 here that are left. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all the Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find out what happened. So send some scouts, much like the guys with leprosy. If they die here, they die. If they die there, they die. Either way, we're dead. And so like this is a really hopeful bunch right now. So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, go and find out what has happened. They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothing and equipment the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of the finest flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said. So they are able, the siege breaks right away, and they see that the Arameans are not close. They took off. They took off so fast that it reads like their clothes fell off, like in a cartoon, like like their shoes fell off and everything. Like that's how fast they ran away. And so like all these prices come down. The people are taking all of the goods that the Arameans have been hoarding for themselves. So the siege is breaking, inflation is coming down. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, because the gate is where they were going to be selling all of the stuff. This was the marketplace. And so this guy was in charge of making sure this was orderly. And the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened as the man of God had said to the king. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer had said to the man of God, look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen? The man of God had replied, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it. And that is exactly what happened to him. For the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died. And so when we saw the Elisha say, this is what's going to happen, then we see it happen, and then the writer recaps that it happened exactly as Elisha said it would happen. And so this is not just somebody who needs an editor. Like it feels like this is very repetitive, but the writer here wants us to recognize the importance of trusting the prophet's word, and that God is doing this work, and it came about exactly as he foretold. And so that's why it's repeated so often in such a short space. But the soldier who said, can this really happen? Even if the Lord opened the floodgates of heaven, like this is impossible. And that imagery of the floodgates of heaven, or some translations might say the windows of heaven, like it's saying, like even if there was great rain and all of the natural order of things were to come about, then this still wouldn't bring about the kind of price drop that you're talking about, Elisha. And so even with a miraculous rainy season, there's no way this could happen. And so what the man of the soldier failed to realize is that when God's involved, he's not limited to the natural rhythms of weather and harvest. When God's involved, he can drive away an army with just the mysterious sounds. Like this is the power of God. And Elisha is fully aware of the power of God, and the people of the northern kingdoms in Israel just don't get it time and time again, that God is powerful and that they should trust his word. And so, so it all comes about exactly as Elisha had foretold, without the floodgates of heaven even having to be opened supernaturally. It was a supernatural scaredy pants for the Aramean army. They're terrified. So, all right. So, chapter 8, verse 1. Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years. So this is probably happening before, these words are happening before the current famine that we just read about, okay? And so Elisha warned her to go because of a coming famine. The woman proceeded to do as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And the land of the Philistines was closer to the coast, and so more natural rain possibilities coming off of the Mediterranean Sea, rivers. It was a little bit easier to maintain crops down there. So she's down in the Philistines for about 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to appeal to the king for her house and land. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, "Tell me about all the great things Elisha has done." Just as Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to appeal to the king for her house and land. Gehazi said, "This is the woman, my lord, the king, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life." The king asked the woman about it, and she told him. Then he assigned an official to her case and said to him, "Give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land from the day she left the country until now." So there are no coincidences, right? Like God is orchestrating these events in a way that shows his providence, his sovereignty. And so Elisha tells the woman, "Go away for 7 years." She comes back. And while she's coming to present her case, the king is talking to Gehazi. Now, what is Gehazi's deal? Because he was the servant of the man of God. And so this is where the timeline might get a little iffy, like when this all happened. But if it's just following the chronology as presented, he was turned away from Elisha because he went back to Naaman to try to get money and clothes and stuff for himself. And so Gehazi now may be just trying to win favor with the king and telling him about Elisha. And so he may just be like a court prophet that is there with the king and trying to, maybe inform on Elisha, but also maybe just saying like, yeah, God is working through Elisha in powerful ways. And so you should not ignore him. And so, so as he's talking about raising a child from the dead, here's the child. Like, that's amazing. That is amazing. And so when she comes, Gehazi's there to verify her story. And the king then has a moment of generosity that we have not seen in the Israelite kings so far, because in Joram's family, Ahab tried to buy the land of Naboth's vineyard, and Naboth didn't want to sell it, so Jezebel conspired against him and had him killed, and then they took the land. And so here we have this possibility that the king, seeing empty land here as the woman and her son have left, the king may have assumed the land for himself. And so instead of keeping it for himself and say, "Tough luck, lady, hit the road," he like Gehazi's here saying, "Yeah, no, this is all true. What she's saying is true. And this is her land. Her son was dead. She's a real evidence of a miracle." And so the king gives her the land, but beyond that, he gives her whatever the land would have produced. Like, this is beyond generosity, because in the Hebrew cycle of every 7 years of debt forgiveness and restoration of land and freedom from slavery, all of these things, like, she's in that cycle, but she didn't have any right to whatever the land produced while she was gone. So the king is actually being incredibly generous in this moment as well. And so one of the few times we read in the Northern Kings, like, oh, that's actually kind of a nice story. He's actually kind of being a nice guy. It doesn't last. Don't worry. It doesn't last. So we will keep going here. Verse 7. Remember, Elijah was tasked before he left the earth. One of the commentaries, as I was reading, like, because we can't say Elijah died because we don't know. And so one commentator just said, before Elijah left the earth. But before Elijah left, he was tasked with anointing Jehu to be king. And so he was supposed to anoint Elisha as his successor, anoint Jehu to be king of Israel, and anoint Hazael to be king of Aram. And Elijah only got one of those things done. And so those things still need to be happening. And so this is where we're going to pick up the story with Elisha stepping in to finish what Elijah should have started, was called to do. So verse 7, Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, was ill. So he went up into enemy territory in Syria. When the king was told, the man of God has come all the way up here, he said to Hazael, take a gift with you and go to meet the man of God. Consult the Lord through him. Ask him, will I recover from this illness? Hazael went to meet Elisha, taking with him as a gift 40 camel loads of all the finest wares of Damascus. He went in and stood before him and said, your son, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, has sent me to ask you, will I recover from this illness? Elisha answered, go and say to him, you will certainly recover. Nevertheless, the Lord has revealed to me that he will in fact die. He stared at him with a fixed gaze until Hazael was embarrassed. Then the man of God began to weep. Why is my Lord weeping? He asked Hazael. Because I know the harm you will do to the Israelites, he answered. You will set fire to their fortified places, kill their young men with the sword, dash their little children to the ground, and rip open their pregnant women. Hazael said, how could your servant, a mere dog, accomplish such a feat? The Lord has shown me that you will become king of Aram, answered Elisha. Then Hazael left Elisha and returned to his master. When Ben-Hadad asked, what did Elisha say to you? Hazael replied, he told me that you would certainly recover. But the next day, he took a thick cloth, soaked it in water, and spread it over the king's face, so that he died. Then Hazael succeeded him as king. So this is a interesting event, and there are some translation questions here as well. And we also get this a question that arises that did the Lord tell Elisha to tell Hazael to lie to Ben-Hadad? And so there's a couple different ways to understand what Elisha says to him. First is to say, essentially, this disease will not kill you. Like, is one way to understand, like, you're very sick, Ben-Hadad, but the disease is not your doom. Another thing is to say, yeah, the Lord just wanted to say, tell him exactly this. Tell Ben-Hadad that you will recover because Hazael needs to be king, and Hazael needs to be able to be in a place of trust where he can eliminate Ben-Hadad. So that's a possibility. The other thing is that the way that you, in where it says, tell him you will recover, there's a Hebrew word, lo. Lo is like, it's not, those aren't the Hebrew letters, but lo. And it can be translated as like, say to him, but it can also be understood as not. So like, say to him, he will not recover. So that is a translation possibility in what Elisha said to Hazael. So there's some ambiguity here. Regardless, everything that Elisha is telling Hazael is all part of God's plan, because all the way back with Elijah was told to anoint Hazael king of Aram. And so this is all still part of God's divine plan for the region, knowing that Hazael is going to do terrible things. He's going to be a terrible king, and especially to the northern kingdoms of Israel. He's going to do awful things. And, one of the, when we talk about prophets saying like, this person is God's man for the job, this is one of those examples where it's like, that doesn't mean it's a good job. That doesn't mean he's a good person. We should recognize that, yes, the scripture tells us that God appoints kings and rulers. So he's not surprised with who's sitting in the halls of government. But it doesn't mean that all of those people are necessarily God's favorites. It doesn't mean that they bring pleasure to God. And so when we see these kinds of examples, like Elisha knows exactly what Hazael is going to do. And, it causes him to weep. And like these pictures of the future that bring pain to his own people, like that, this shows us that Elisha doesn't see the role of prophet as an opportunity for glorification and like status. Even as the king is sending Hazael with these gifts, in other countries, the prophets were often like, you buy their good favor, you buy their fortunes. And Elisha has no interest in any of those things. And he's turned them away before. And so, so he says, you're going to be a terrible person. And Hazael takes it as permission. Like, all right, let's do this. And so he goes and tells the king, yeah, you'll recover. But then the next day he essentially waterboards him, is what he's doing here, and kills him. So the king is dead. Long live the king is kind of the transition here. When I was in Turkey years ago, it was an election season, and I was asking our strategic partner that we were with, like, is one good or one bad? And he said, I'm in exile. They're all bad kings. And like when we read about the kings in the northern kingdom and even in the kingdoms around, like they're all bad kings. Now, historical fact, Hazael is one of the kings that is mentioned in extra biblical sources. So the Assyrian Empire at this time is rising and laying their own siege around this region. And the king of Assyria mentions Hazael, the son of Nun, essentially, like basically saying he's a usurper, which is what the scripture tells us as well. He is not a part of a royal lineage. He took the throne. And so he's starting his own dynasty at this point. So he doesn't have a father-son of situation. So so this if you're curious, the Assyrian king, I had it written down, Shalmaneser III. So if you want to look him up later, you don't have to, but if you're interested. Okay. So now we're going to take a pause and go back to the southern kingdom for just a moment in verse 16. In the 5th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, began his reign as king of Judah. Now, Joram and Jehoram are actually the same name, but our translators have done us a favor and chose to distinguish them by short spelling changes. So, and there could have been a reason that like they're basically cousins, Joram and Jehoram, because they are tied in with the northern kingdom through marriage. So Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, began to reign as king of Judah. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he had married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, for the sake of his servant David, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. He had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants forever. So Jehoram is married to Ahab's daughter, Athaliah, and she will be important next week. I believe we'll get to her. But she, so she brings all of Jezebel's influence with her into the southern kingdom, and Jehoram starts following after the same kind of idolatry as the northern kingdoms. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So Jehoram went to Zair with all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. His army, however, fled back home. To this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah. Libnah revolted at the same time. As for the other events of Jehoram's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Jehoram rested with his ancestors and was buried with them in the city of David, and Ahaziah, his son, succeeded him as king. And so we don't get a lot here from Jehoram, and we'll actually get more detail with the southern kings in the books of Chronicles. And so we'll get to those later. But his really only noted thing is he was surrounded and he managed to escape. That's all that the chronicler here, the historian in Second Kings, is like, he escaped the Edomites. But before this, the Edomites were a vassal state of Judah. Like they gave Judah tributes and taxes and all that kind of stuff. And so they broke free. And so this is from here on out, Edom is going to be separate from the Judah rulership. And so he dies and Ahaziah takes over. In the 12th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah, a granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. He followed the ways of the house of Ahab and did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the house of Ahab had done. For he was related by marriage to Ahab's family. Ahaziah went with Joram, son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Aram and Ramoth Gilead. The Arameans wounded him, so King Joram returned to Jezreel to recover from his wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him at Ramoth in his battle with Hazael, king of Aram. Then Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to Jezreel to see Joram, son of Ahab, because he had been wounded. And so, again, there's more detail in Chronicles, and in a little bit, we'll see how Ahaziah actually dies. So Hazael's king, he's going to war against Israel, and the southern tribes go and join in an alliance to fight against the Arameans. And Ahaziah is wounded there. But that's one part of the anointing that Elijah was commissioned to do. And so chapter 9 then tells us the other part. The prophet Elisha summoned a man from the company of the prophets and said to him, "Tuck your cloak into your belt, take this flask of olive oil with you, and go to Ramoth Gilead." Wait, Ramoth Gilead? We just read about that place. There's a war happening there in the section just above. So Elisha is sending one of the school of the prophets, go to a war zone. So go ahead, do that. When you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. So that's a different Jehoshaphat than the king Jehoshaphat. The son of Nimshi, go to him, get him away from his companions, and take him into an inner room. Then take the flask and pour the oil on his head and declare, "This is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel." Then open the door and run. Don't delay. I just love the imagery, in Napoleon Dynamite, which is not usually a connection here. There are moments where characters will say something and then just leave the scene right away. It looks like it is a movie directed by a high school student, right? Because it kind of is. But that picture, go, anoint him, run away. Those are the kinds of stage directions. So I just see a lot of Napoleon Dynamite imagery as I read this. But he's supposed to go and anoint him in private, so not in front of everybody, and then just take off. So the young prophet went to Ramoth Gilead. When he arrived, he found the army officers sitting together. "I have a message for you, commander," he said. "For which of us?" asked Jehu. "For you, commander," he replied. Jehu got up and went into the house. Then the prophet poured the oil on Jehu's head and declared, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people, Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab, your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her. Then he opened the door and ran. So he does exactly what he was told. That's it. So all of these prophecies were told to Ahab, and it has taken time to see Ahab's household ultimately destroyed. But now, like, it's going to happen. It's all coming to pass. And so when Jehu went out and to his fellow officers, one of them asked him, "Is everything all right? Why did this maniac come to you?" I mean, like, here's a guy, he's girded his loins, essentially. So he's tucked in his robe so he can run. He's like, "I need to talk to you." And he goes in, says a quick thing, and runs away. Like, yeah, he does look like a maniac. And so what did this maniac want to say to you? And you know the man and the sort of things he says. Jehu replied, "Crazy people, be crazy," is essentially his response. I mean, he's just told, you're going to be king and you're going to wipe out all of the house of Ahab. Like, it might take a minute for Jehu to like really get his brain around what's going on here. That's not true, they said. "Tell us." Jehu said, "Here's what he told me. This is what the Lord says. I anoint you king over Israel." They quickly took their cloaks and spread them under him on the bare steps. Then they blew the trumpet and shouted, "Jehu is king." And so this taking off of the cloaks is a sign of submission, and basically saying, like, Jehu should not have to walk on the ground. And so this is something that we see later in Jesus's ministry when he's coming into the city of Jerusalem in the triumphal entry. People are putting down their cloaks on the road. They're shouting Hosanna, which means Lord save us, and like they're recognizing that Jesus is an important rescuer. So like they're anticipating a king. And so here the commanders are now saying, "All right, Jehu, you're king. We're trusting you." So Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram and all Israel had been defending Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Aram, but King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him in the battle with Hazael, king of Aram. Jehu said, "If you desire to make me king, don't let anyone slip out of that city to go and tell the news in Jezreel." So he is telling the soldiers to keep the folks in Ramoth Gilead, keep them in the city. And he's going to go to Jezreel to confront Joram. Then he got into his chariot and rode to Jezreel because Joram was resting there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had gone down to see him. When the lookout standing on the tower in Jezreel saw Jehu's troops approaching, he called out, "I see some troops coming." "Get a horseman," Joram ordered. "Send him to meet them and ask, 'Do you come in peace?'" The horseman rode off to meet Jehu and said, "This is what the king says. Do you come in peace?" "What do you have to do with peace?" Jehu replied. "Fall in behind me." The lookout reported, "The messenger has reached them, but he isn't coming back." So the king sent out a second horseman. When he came to them, he said, "This is what the king says. Do you come in peace?" Jehu replied, "What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me." The lookout reported, "He has reached them, but he isn't coming back either." The driving is like that of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a maniac. So this is an interesting image because Jehu's leading an army to Jezreel, and they send these two scouts. And what Jehu is saying is like, "What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me," is saying, like, what I'm about to do is not a peaceful thing. Do you want to join me? And so when the watchman is like, they're not coming back, like either those watchmen or those scouts were like, "This is a bad scene, I'm out of here," or they recognized Jehu, I'm going to follow him. And so they join in with his army. So they're not coming back separately from the folks that Jehu is leading. And I love this detail. Like the guy's like, it looks like Jehu, son of Nimshi, drives like a maniac. There's a band called Drive Like Jehu. Yeah, it's like a punk band, if you're curious. But they have a maniacal sound. So he's coming. Joram responds, hitch up my wagon. And when it was hitched, Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, rode out, each in his own chariot to meet Jehu. They met him at the plot of ground that had belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. So that's important. Like here's this plot of land that really sealed Ahab's fate. And here is where the last descendant of Ahab that's going to be king over Israel encounters the one who is going to take over. And so when Joram saw Jehu, he asked, have you come in peace, Jehu? How can there be peace, Jehu replied, as long as all the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound? Joram turned around and fled, calling out to Ahaziah, treachery, Ahaziah. Treachery. Then Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his chariot officer, pick him up and throw him on the field that belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember how you and I were riding together in chariots behind Ahab, his father, when the Lord spoke this prophecy against him. Yesterday I saw the blood of Naboth and hit the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, and I will surely make you pay for it on this plot of ground, declares the Lord. Now then, pick him up and throw him on that plot in accordance with the word of the Lord. When Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw what had happened, he fled up the road to Beth Hagan. Jehu chased him, shouting, kill him too. They wounded him in his chariot on the way up to Gur near Ibleam, but he escaped to Megiddo and died there. His servants took him by chariot to Jerusalem and buried him with his ancestors in his tomb in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king of Judah. And so Ahaziah's reign is very short. He dies from these wounds from Jehu's soldiers, but he does get taken back into the city of David. He's buried honorably, whereas Joram is left out in a field, which is a dishonorable way to be buried. This is all part of the curse on the house of Ahab. Verse 30, then Jehu went to Jezreel. When Jezebel heard about it, she put on eye makeup, and arranged her hair and looked out a window. As Jehu entered the gate, she asked, have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master? So there's some great digs here. So first of all, putting on eye makeup and doing her hair, the writer here is essentially saying she dressed like a prostitute. And Jezebel may be, in a way, trying to look appealing to Jehu, to say, I've been a queen, I would be your queen. And there may be a bit of like trying to trap him through her seduction. But then she says, have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master? Now, Zimri was the king before Omri, Ahab's dad. and so this same like plot of like saying you're a usurper and your kingdom won't last, and like she's making that kind of a dig at him as well. So he looked up the window and called out, who is on my side? Who? 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him. So they're looking out the window like, we are. And he said, throw her down, Jehu said. So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered the wall and the horses as they trampled her underfoot. Jehu went in and ate and drank. Take care of that cursed woman, he said, and bury her, for she was a king's daughter. But when they went out to bury her, they found nothing except her skull, her feet, and her hands. They went back and told Jehu, who said, this is what the word of the Lord he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbite. On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's body will be like dung on the ground and in the plot at Jezreel, so that no one will be able to say, this is Jezebel. So that's the end of Jezebel. Totally obliterated, just as the Lord said. And all that's left is her skull and her hands, right? But the horses trampling, the dogs devouring her flesh, as soon as she's thrown over out the window, the Yehu's like, all right, let's go inside. Everything I set out to do, I've done. And so we don't know how long he's inside before he's like, we should probably bury her. She was a king's daughter. She deserves a little bit of respect, but there wasn't anything really left to bury. And so the house of Ahab is gone. So part of the kingly line in the northern kingdom has several different dynasties. The kings in Judah, it's all still descendants of David. And that is all part of God's promise to David. Even Ahaziah and Jehoram, who are evil and wicked, the Lord says, like, I will preserve them, not because of them, but because of David. And so we see that continue on throughout. So Ahab's house is being removed. And chapter 10, we'll see a little bit more of how Yehu solves the Ahab problem. And then in chapter 11, we'll see Athaliah, the queen regent, take the throne for a season. And then we come into Josiah or Joash and some good kings for a little bit. But the days of the kingdom of Israel are waning. They are getting closer and closer to the end. So any questions on what we covered so far in 2 Kings? Lee.
He had leprosy, right?
Which one?
Gehazi?
Yes. Yeah.
Did they get so close, or?
Yeah. So the question is, Gehazi, he had leprosy when he left Elisha. So why is he so close to the king? So a couple things. His leprous condition could have cleared up. So that might be part of why he could come to the king. The other thing is maybe the king didn't care. He's not a righteous person, right? And so there may have been just a lax attitude around purity laws that would allow him to come in, or maybe he was far enough away. So but there is a good likelihood that it could have cleared up, because the leprosy that they're talking about in the Old Testament is not like leprosy today, or we call leprosy today. So it's just all kinds of different skin conditions. So it could have been cleared up and he purified. It's a possibility. So good question. Any other questions? All right. Did I hear somebody say something? No.
No, scary. I was just reading through a few things, rereading. I was just like looking at, when you talk about Jehu shooting Joram between the shoulders, that's when he was running away. So he shot him in the back, correct?
Yeah. So not like the most honorable thing.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but not also like Joram is not an honorable person. So,
he got what he deserved.
Yeah, we should not feel bad for Joram. Like that's, really, we shouldn't feel bad for any of the northern kings. They're all awful. And so, Any other questions? All right. This is the part of the Bible that when I first read it, and I read Judges in junior high, And I was like, is there more of this, like violence and craziness and all that kind of stuff? As a junior hire, it like just spoke to me in an important way. And so I kept reading. So Judges, and then into Samuel and the life of David and his warfare, and then the books of Kings, like all of these things, like really like spoke to me, like, because it was exciting. It was war, it was violence, all this stuff that was very interesting. And I didn't know it was in the Bible when I was in junior high. But now I read back on these, and like I recognize that the goal in these stories is not to glorify violence,
No.
which is one of the challenges in our culture even now. Like there is a lot of violence glorification in movies and TV shows, in video games, all kinds of things. And you know, people would look at the Bible and say, wow, what a violent book. But the goal is not to glorify the violence as much as to reveal to us that sinful behavior leads to violence in all kinds of different ways. And so as a young man reading this, I was like, wow, this is crazy and super interesting. But now I read through these things, and like, while I say you shouldn't feel bad for Joram, like we should grieve with the loss of life ever, but also recognizing that God's divine justice is being meted out in these stories. But it's still, it grieves the Lord that his people are rebelling.
Mm-hmm.
It grieves the Lord that they have fallen so far. And so Elisha is there to give hope and directions and warnings to the northern kingdoms, to the northern king, and they just don't receive it. And so they keep going their own way and keep falling into destruction over and over again. And that's really what the prophets do throughout the Bible. They give the warning and the people reject them. And so, but the Lord said it will happen, and it happened. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, questions, observations?
Sorry, I'm laughing. My observation would be this section from 9
Yeah.
is kind of like a B-rated low budget movie scenario.
Yeah.
Treachery, Isaiah.
Yeah.
I can
Treachery.
just imagine it.
Yeah.
Either that or like something you'd see over in England, maybe the BBC stuff.
Right. Yeah. A BBC like Sunday Night Mystery. Yeah. So part of one of my favorite movies, I think I may have talked about this before, is No Country for Old Men. Have I talked about this movie? We're actually going to watch it in my guys watch movies group in a couple of weeks. You signed up for that, right? I think no, you didn't. Maybe not. Anyway, but No Country for Old Men is it's a Coen Brothers film, and it is it really, there's violence in it, but it's people trying to get away with something, and it's really about the inevitability of like consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you say, it reminds you of like a low grade B movie, but this really does remind me of that kind of a story where like the Coen brothers are great at giving these flawed characters who think they're going to get away with something. Mm-hmm. And over again, their consequences keep catching up with them. And that's what I see happening in this section. Consequences. So, yeah. All right. Any other thoughts, observations? All right, then. Well, let us wrap up today, and we'll be back next week. So we'll shoot to read 10, 11, and 12 as kind of the goal for what I'll try to cover next week. So if you want to read ahead, feel free. And if you have any questions, be sure to jot those down as you're reading. So I will see you all later, and everybody have a great week.